So this is Pop YS for November. Pop YS was a thing I invented in 2000 this year in 2020 to kind of be a monthly webinar series that could be about anything. It might have guests, it might have a collection development theme, it was a little bit of everything. And then 2020 turned into the year that was about everything. So it was constant surprises. So we've had sessions about working with homeschoolers and connecting to teens virtually and doing virtual readers advisory, and it's been a real ride. So we are not having a session in December. This is the last Pop YS of 2020. That having been said, we're going to bring it back in 2021. But in case you have not already heard, I am bringing back Check It Out, which was the #1 thing I got requests for. And that is my monthly collection development webinar. And that's basically where I spend an hour every month telling you the best books that came out. So in January, we're going to have both. We're going to keep up Pop YS, which is going to allow us to have a variety of guest speakers and writing range topics and focus on programming. And we're going to bring back Check It Out, which really, really drills down on collection development. So hooray! That's coming in January of next year. So with that in mind, we are not meeting in December, but we have something special in December, which is we are having our first summer sessions, our summer programming sessions, because if you're anything like me, you are thinking about summer. That's almost not even a lie because I'm so tired of winter and I'm ready for this year to be over. But on December 16th, Sam, one thing you could do would be to get the links to put these the links to these in the chat. December 16th, from 1 to 2, we're having a session. It will be recorded. And the way that I divided it up this year is this session is for if you have done summer reading 4 years or less. So this is a welcome to summer reading presentation. And then on December 17th from 1 to 2, we're having a if you've done summer reading 5 years or more session. And these are not, they're not going to be in-depth review of the theme. They're not going to be going into ideas. They're not going to be, these are literally introductions to the topic, getting your feet wet, kind of starting out with this. And that's what we're offering in December. So we're having new to summer and been around for summer. And those are going to be our first intro sessions. And then we'll have more in-depth training in January. And as you can tell from the link Sam has just put in, they are already open, so please register for them. So those are my housekeeping details. As per usual, if you have questions about them, you can get in touch with me. But I could not be more happy to have our last Pop YS session be with our returning friend, Thomas Malek. I'm going to give you his bio for those of you that don't know it, and then I'm going to turn it over to him. So Thomas is back by popular demand. I got so many requests for him to come back and do another comic session that I asked him and he gratefully said yes. With more than 10 years experience as a teen services librarian, Thomas Malek works at Richland Library, the 2017 IMLS National Medal winner in Columbia, South Carolina. He has composed articles for public libraries, The Hub, Book Riot, Comics Bookcase, Toastmaster, and Library Trends. He also reviews graphic novels for No Flying No Tights and the School Library Journal. In addition to being a writer and a local author, he has spoken about podcasting, graphic novels, and teen programs at events such as New York's Comic Con, LibraryCon Live, American Library Association conferences, and was the closing keynote at the Quebec Library Association's 2019 Annual Library Conference. While studying for his MLS at the University of South Carolina, Thomas won a student book collecting award for, you're going to be surprised, for Thomas Cooper Library for his curation of the works of the gods of manga, Osamu Tezuka. He has been on YALSA's Great Graphic Novels for Teens and the School Library Journal's Best Graphic Novel Selection Committee, as well as the Civils Award Jury for Middle and High School Nonfiction. He is also the person I always go to when I have questions about comics and graphic novels, because on top of all this, he's also my friend and super fun to hang out with. And I'm so grateful that he's here to do this for you. He knows more about comics than like any person I've ever met. And I'm excited he's going to be doing this. So I'm going to turn it over to Thomas now. I'm going to be in the chat, but I'm also muting and turning my camera off. And Thomas, take it away.
Blessed and cursed with the gift of comics knowledge. That is me. Hello, everyone. I'm going to get to share screen, or I would hope I could get to share screen for a PowerPoint. Let's see here.
We should have tested that, the hubris. I mean, you should be a co-host. Let's see. I see share screen.
Samantha, I have share screen, but my screen sharing is disabled.
Uh-oh. All right, give it a go now.
There we are.
Perfect.
Excellent. And I'm going to try to fit this into 1 hour. So I'm going to try to go for 45 minutes for my speaking bits, and then we're going to do Q&A to wrap this up. How does that sound, everyone? Thank you, Angie, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for having me again, Librarians of Iowa and State Library of Iowa, and Angie. Always a pleasure. But let's get some introductions out of the way about Richland Library and the fact that comics are Richland Library. Here you see an issue of Fantastic Four from 2011 by South Carolina's own Jonathan Hickman and Steve Epting, along with Rick Magyar and Paul Mounts. When they needed to design the future foundation building for the Fantastic Four, where do all the super scientists work but in Richland Library's building? I think Steve Epting borrowed from our architecture to get some of these pictures. So you think 2020 is weird, try having Spider-Man and space aliens and disembodied floating heads zipping through your lobby. On Richland Library shelves, here's some data from end of January of this year that we have over 39,000 graphic novels, including nearly 7,000 different volumes of manga, almost 10,000 volumes of children's graphic novels, and then almost 23,000 volumes of what's just in the general graphic novel collection. We call it the adult graphic novel collection. So we have a lot of them, and I've been reading as many as I can. Everything you're about to see in this presentation, please take it with the grain of salt that I am but one human being. And if this was a presentation about how to start a film collection, you have a million films to choose from. So everything we're going to talk about is like the starter pack version of graphic novels and comics and collection development and all this business. So let's talk about gateways into comics. How do people get into comics? Why do they like reading them? What separates these different kinds of comics from one another? What are the trends? I have survey data from about 300 different respondents of all different ages. And I got all kinds of anecdotes I'm about to share with you. And I noticed 5 different patterns in what got people into comics and that you may be interested in stocking in your library. Gateway number 1 was newspapers and magazines. A format, the comic strip news in the newspaper, just extremely readable, very basic, just usually little squares and rectangles in one linear fashion. And if they're doing their job right with the layouts, you almost can't miss the gag. Even here with the framing of Nancy here on the left, seeing Sluggo using his water pistol on someone, Nancy disappearing in the second panel because we're watching Sluggo on his own, squirting some other kid, and then the view widens back out in that third panel where we and Nancy know this kid's about to get drenched. It's a fantastic use of comic timing, of bringing the audience in on the joke. Every piece of visual information here is linear, and even the question that I always see from people who don't read comics or who have struggled reading them, or I promote them in the library and people say they just can't get into them. They go, I don't know if I'm supposed to look at it and then read it, or read it and then look at it, or am I supposed to do some hybrid approach, or how does this work? And the key is, one, if the comic's well done, it shouldn't be too big an issue. Like for here, you could read each panel and then look, or do the reverse. Everything is coherent either way. And nowadays, you had Ernie Bushmiller back in the day. Nowadays, Nancy done by Olivia James, and you can read this online. Still doing these visual gags, Nancy trying to go to school here, but every time you cut between the panels, there's this gutter here, this white space between the panels, and Nancy is resisting the flow of time in trying to get to school. And it's an inescapable thing. Even if she's trying to go slowly, we're going to progress time just by reading the thing. And so a lot of respondents, they have fond memories of, you read Family Circus and you're following the dotted line across the page, and the reader's imagination takes over for certain things because you're hopping over the things with Billy and you're hearing things and seeing the characters as he's moving around. You have your classics like Garfield and Calvin and Hobbes. Garfield, sarcastic cat, Once again, simple lines of movement. It's easy to tell one event from the other. Calvin and Hobbes, sometimes action-packed and super imaginative, sometimes just a dialogue between a child and their imaginary or not so imaginary stuffed tiger, with some critique here of superhero comics. They can also go political in the comics. With you had Doonesbury, which has been running for decades with its political commentary, but also more recently, something like The Boondocks by Aaron Magruder. I get 12 and 13-year-olds who will call. They'll call the Reader's Advisory line. They'll send us emails, or even their parents will, and say, "We've read all of the Boondocks collections. What else do you have like it?" And it's such a hard question because Aaron Magruder was way up here in terms of pushing what you could do in these comic strips. There's really no one else like him, like in the exact same way. But comics have always been pushing the envelope. Newspaper comics are no different. And being such a great starting point, you go back to a classic like Peanuts. You have this square of 4 panels here. No matter, as long as you're starting in the top left and ending in the bottom right, this gag works no matter which way you read it. One panel comics, like Far Side, you can look at the gag. There's a giant bug in the back. This lady's driving a car. Or you can read it first and then see that there's a giant bug in the backseat. It works. It's just such a great gateway to reading. And I include the magazine rack with this. You get used to reading Mad Magazine and all the different crazy artists in there. Or back in the day, you had Misty with all the different horror comics over in England, or Beano with all kinds of different European comics. And it just gets them started while they're young and keeps them going while they're old, because a lot of people love these magazines and series for decades. But today, how many people are spreading out the newspaper at home? It's more likely that a lot of the, especially, I'd say probably anyone, I'm going to put an age limit on it, but a lot of younger people these days, obsessed with webcomics. You can follow it at your own pace. All the old strips are always there. You can comment directly to the creators. The creators might have an ongoing blog to go with each entry in the comic, and they get fan feedback. And a lot of them come out in print editions that sometimes that delineation to say, oh, this was a webcomic, but now it's in print. What's practical to librarians is just, is it a quality story? Is it going to be in demand? Is it still in print? Cucumber Quest started as a webcomic, and it took off even harder once it came out in print. But for a lot of readers, they may not have heard of Cucumber Quest. They just know it's beautiful art, it's an amazing story, great for all ages. You should stock Cucumber Quest, absolutely. Check Please starts as a webcomic, gets an enormous Kickstarter campaign, is now this print book series, and it's doing fantastically online and on shelves. Homestuck, more interactive, lots of different games and activities that you do through your computer while you're reading, but they managed to translate that into a print experience that people would recognize. So that's the first gateway. Second gateway, superheroes. And if I had 5 hours, I would go into every last little bit of superhero trivia. That's not what this is today. If we were to go back to, say, 80s, 90s, I saw a lot of responses, talking about the George Perez Wonder Woman, with all the detailed art and all these beautifully framed characters and poses, and there's just so much joy in that comic. Or you get back to Spider-Man with Todd McFarlane on the art, and he draws all the webs and it looks sick, and you've never seen it like that before. And then he used that same style when he made Spawn. And Jim Lee X-Men, like the bombastic style, and all these barrel-chested characters, and everything's posed so that it's like blowing up into your face. Well, what are superheroes like today in libraries? Well, Batman's still popular. That will not be a surprise to anyone. He is still this symbol of law and order, where the Joker is, the ultimate chaos that never gets old for a lot of people. You have new characters, recent like Miss Marvel, who can act as sort of a new reader and fan reader insert when she meets Wolverine of the X-Men for the first time. Maybe the reader's reading Wolverine for the first time. She joins the Avengers, we're joining the Avengers, a great gateway superhero. Characters like Deadpool. I mean, when the movies came out, were people not asking at your library, like, hey, do you guys have any of those Deadpool comics? Superheroes being around for so long that they start breaking the fourth wall, they start cracking jokes on themselves, they start making fun of the franchise, they might even comment about all these movie tie-ins and TV show versions going around. And this leads me to a point about what kind of superhero comics you could be collecting. There was an article about a college teacher who taught 3 different versions of the Spider-Man story. You had Ultimate Spider-Man, which was like a fresh take on the Peter Parker narrative. You had Spider-Man India, which is the same basic story, but taking place in another country. And then you had Mary Jane, which was all about Spider-Man, but from Mary Jane's perspective. And what Kate Tensky ran into, and you can find the article on Women Write About Comics, is that there was this vocal contingent of fanboys in the class. They were fine with Indian Spider-Man. They liked it. But for some reason, having to read Mary Jane, having to read a woman's point of view, or this is a superhero comic, but it's about a woman who doesn't have superpowers. They were like getting really up in arms about it. They're like, I don't understand why I even had to read that. What a waste of time. But then girls come up to the professor and say, hey, I kind of liked it, and I feel like I have to keep it secret because there's like this really vocal group that doesn't want me to enjoy these comics for some reason. I've seen it on Free Comic Book Day with the superhero girls line that DC does, like taking a lot of the superheroes, putting them in a cute cartoon style, lots of different girl superheroes. And I've seen teenage boys see that who otherwise will take any recommendation that the library throws their way, but they see that and they go, that shouldn't even exist. They're ruining how superhero comics work. And I'm like, why? It's escapist. It's fun. It's colorful costumes. It's action packed. It's heroes versus villains. All of that, like, why would you put a gate on that? You should be welcoming the fact that more girls are going to get into it and grow up, and they'll be fans, and there'll be more people that you can connect with over this stuff. If you look at sales charts, and this is retail sale charts through BookScan for the month of October, what do we get from top to bottom? We get Doomsday Clock, which is a tie-in to Watchmen at number 2, which features Batman, Doomsday Clock that is. Then we get Batman, 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 Star Wars, Sandman, a perennial hit, Trick or Treat, how did that get in there? Franchises only, please. Harleen, a Batman villain, more Sandman, Batman all the way down with books with him, or V for Vendetta by the writer of Watchmen. But it doesn't have to be that way. Among the survey data, there were a number of women who they either read A-Force, or they enjoy Batgirl, or they enjoy Birds of Prey. Different readers who said, I like all lady hero squads. Bunch of male superheroes, fine, but like, can we get some ladies in here as well? Among other kinds of representation, honestly. And you see, even with the Wakanda one here, like they had to throw Spider-Man on the cover just to be like, no, really, you'll enjoy it. It's got the heroes you recognize. It's like, okay, but it can also just be a great series with its own characters. There's going to be an enormous recommendation list at the end of this presentation. I got partway into a superhero thing with it, but really, it's such a finely detailed rabbit hole with decades of continuity that I'm going to recommend a resource called Comic Book Herald. They're very good at breaking up the different waves and generations of superhero comics, and they have a lot of new reader-friendly and collection-friendly guides to, if you wanted to read this character in order for the past 40 years, here's how you do it. If you wanted to know the collected editions that'll lead you to this or that author, here's where to find it. And so he's really done a lot of the same footwork that I would do. So I don't want to reinvent the wheel that they've already built. So Comic Book Herald is a great resource. That sort of thing. And there's lots of other superhero options. Part of the mega list at the end is going to have lots of different superhero universes or just series that can be very self-contained. If you read Invincible, you just read Invincible volume 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And you don't have to read a tie-in over here and an anniversary thing over there and a crossover over. No. And different styles and forms of representation, like Legend of the Manta Magi, getting into Afro mythology and whatnot. So the answer there is the gateway then was superheroes, the gateway now is superheroes. A lot of respondents would talk about they ran into like just that one issue, right? They found that one hero that is either visually appealing or they like their superpower, what have you, and they would just check in on them and just follow them over the years. And that's still what's happening. Gateway 3, reputation. Some graphic novels and series have evergreen reputations. They just haven't gone out of style. Watchmen, now an HBO series. Sandman, now an audio series through Amazon, right? And then Dark Knight Returns, which Frank Miller did such a great job reinventing Batman that people wish that would just still be Batman 40 years later. And they're still bestsellers, and people love to recommend them, and for good reason. I mean, they're still great books and all, but and Neil Gaiman would say about the Sandman series all the time, he compared it to a comics STD, because so many people in the 90s, they would get into relationships and their girlfriend would drop off an issue or a volume of Sandman at the time, and it would spread the fan base. It was like everyone was just dating around, and eventually Sandman just permeated the youth culture until everyone was into it. But there are new series with new reputations. 2001, The Walking Dead launches. Here's a comic in black and white. It's going to have a consistent art style. It's going to follow the same cast of characters. If someone dies, they're dead forever, unlike in a lot of these superhero stories. If a character's wounded or disabled, they're going to stay that way. There's no magic here. They're all in the real world, more or less. And like I said about Invincible, volume 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like it's very straightforward that way. Saga has been enormous, has gotten a lot of people freshly into comics who didn't know that it could be that irreverent, that pretty, that dramatic. Saga is just one of those, it seems to be all things to all people with its appeal. And then recent graphic novels like Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me. Just every year, a different crop of graphic novels will break out, and people are just breathlessly recommending it over and over until you can't get away from it. And people come into the library, hey, I keep hearing about this Laura Dean graphic novel. Yes, get it. It's won awards, it's won acclaim, it's beautiful. On a similar note, remember when Lumberjanes came out and it kept coming out and it just kicked off all these young readers who are like, okay, do you have anything else like Lumberjanes? Do you have more Lumberjanes? Do you have the Lumberjanes books? Did you hear about the Lumberjane cartoon? Just new properties coming along and just creating new waves of readers with them. Jerry Craft with New Kid, and now the sequel Class Act, which is also amazing. You should get that one too while you're at it. Jerry Craft, he said recently in an interview with School Library Journal, where he was trying to get this thing published, and all these different publishers were like, oh, we don't need to know about the real life stories of some young black kid. Wrong. It's actually going to be, I think, an enormous new wave, and Jerry Craft is showing us all how it's done, honestly. And you have adaptations from other media. The podcast, The Adventure Zone, about this family all playing role-playing games at a table together. They went and made graphic novels out of it. Or like Critical Role, another podcast about role-playing, a wonderful graphic novel series. All of these will be in that mega list. And today, those same reputations, nowadays you find this stuff in the classroom. Art Spiegelman's Mouse, which won the Pulitzer Prize back in the 80s, mid-80s. You're going to find that assigned in English classes. March, what a behemoth, right? At first it came out and it was winning acclaim, and then the teachers and librarians got a hold of it and said, hold on, there's an amazing message here, and there's something educational, but also entertaining and just very clear-eyed and clear-hearted that we need to teach young people. Everyone should read this, and they should. And then Persepolis, when that came along as comic and movie, just telling the story of this young girl, and you see it in modernism classes along with Mouse, just for the considerations of how do you portray family, how do you portray country, how do you portray these competing interests of when you're young versus as you age, and these portrayals through time and history. So Reputation, there used to be some graphic novels that really blew up in the 80s, and that was amazing for them. And nowadays, there are just so many talented creators blowing up the scene with their creations. Gateway 4, manga. Sorry, we already did that webinar. You're going to have to click that link that Samantha shared earlier, because that was its own hour-long spiel. But I'm happy to repeat the soapbox moment that just you don't know what comics are going to be to somebody, whether it's the thing they escape to during lunch or the thing that they read with their friends, or if there's a character or a series that they're following because it has an emotional impact on them, or if this is the thing that they take pride in, that they're like, okay, I follow this series and these are the books on my shelf and everyone else in the world has their books, but these are mine. They're special to me. You just don't know. I didn't want to leave manga out at all. Gateway 5. Digestibles, as I like to call them. I'm seeing a whole lot of stuff come up in the chat, but Gateway 5 with digestibles. I'm using this to describe the digests. A lot of responses that came into the survey, in addition to like the newspapers and magazines, there seemed to be this other category of digests, and it represented Archie comics, and they're still making these digests today. But especially back in the 80s and 90s, there was this big deal of you go to the grocery checkout line, right? And you see the prices on these $1.50, $2.50. This one's an issue of Josie and the Pussycats, but it's another Archie property, early 90s. One of the best comic book adaptations to film. All right, stuff at DC and Marvel. Josie's got y'all burnt, but the magic of these was it was the seemingly inexhaustible supply of one kind of comic. Like Archie's always going to be looking for a date. Jughead will always be kind of over whatever's happening in favor of just having a snack. You know, Betty and Veronica will always be like kind of, you know, best friends, kind of frenemies when it comes to dating, but you know, generally like just really wholesome everyday stuff. But I think what's happened, there's a new version of this that's happened over the past decade, and that is, well, Jeff Smith's Bone, I think, was a precursor to this. But Raina Telgemeier with Smile, she really set something off where Archie was not necessarily on these shelves and just ubiquitous in grocery stores, but Smile hit a whole new generation of tweens right between the eyes, and they all said, I want to read 100 books just like this. But Raina Telgemeier doing graphic novels, it was like, okay, she had her Babysitter's Club series already out. That was something. But she needs like a couple of years to, you know, get another book out. And so there was this whole industry upswell that happened with this. And then you also see it with Kazu Kibuishi's Amulet series with this amazing fantasy adventure, and kids catch up to it. And I'm sure they've come to you at your desk and said, I'm looking for amulets. Do you have any more amulets? Or they come in and say, I like Smile by Raina Telgemeier. I hope you know Raina Telgemeier. And then George O'Connor's Olympian series, going through the pantheon of gods there. And what else you got? I'm sure you've heard parents talking about, you know, my kid keeps reading the same Dog Man book a dozen times. They're reading Diary of a Wimpy Kid a dozen times. Nowadays, I think, what is it? The Last Kids on Earth, or the Last Kids Who Have to Save the Earth, or something. Along with Wings of Fire, how many of you have been getting questions about dragon books? It's because of Wings of Fire, just so you know. It's a series of books. It has a series of graphic novel adaptations that Barry Deutsch from the Hereville series, which is also amazing, has been adapting. And it causes you to run into, so back in the day, a parent could just say, well, they like Archie comics every so often, you know, just throw an extra $1.50 out there. They get another digest, and then they stack up to the ceiling. But nowadays it's, okay, I've read every single Dogman book. What's something else like it that I can read 50 of? It creates this appetite. And so in children's graphic novels, and especially middle grade graphic novels, these kids, they grow into finding the thing that they really like, and they want to read a lot of it. And it's up to us to keep, you know, blowing oxygen on this thing so that they continue that love of comics. And the publishers are no fool on this, by the way. If you look over at DC with a lot of their younger reader and YA reader stuff, look at some of the author names on these graphic novels. I mean, you've got Daniel Page, Kami Garcia, Lauren Miracle, L.L. McKinney, Mariko Tamaki, Sarah Kuhn. You have Grace Ellis from Lumberjanes, just pumping out all these graphic novels, and they're all at least pretty good, and then a fair number of them are pretty great. And like, I think DC's really gotten their ducks in a row where it's like having these superhero comics arranged in such a way where you have to go to a comic book shop and spend $4 or $5 on a single issue, or wait for these trades to come out, but then a series gets canceled or whatnot. Just have a bunch of self-contained graphic novels. Just focus on the character, keep a consistent style, tell that entertaining story. Don't make people have to hunt for it, and people go out and find it. It's a beautiful thing. So that gets me that far in the presentation. I have some rules for promoting comics that I want to talk about. I have 10 of them, and I have some examples for each. I'm going to take a quick swig of water. So if you're promoting comics in your library, step one, show off your art. Don't just have a bunch of book spines. Like, at least face them cover out, please. Like, they have to be drawn. And in almost all cases, they have to be colored in too. So they're going to be attractive packages. Just as a neat picture, I just want to show off Veronica's ennui here. She's so rich, but why is she worried? Two, don't apologize for comics. You see these phrases, you might see it in a newspaper or something. It's like, biff, pow, comics aren't for kids anymore. Cut that out. Just take ownership of it. So many comics scholars and icons and whatnot have, they could be over 100 years old by now. You see so many comic scholars breaking ground who have been into this stuff for decades. Like, it's not a new discovery that comics are fun. You go to Linda Berry with Making Comics. She's so great at talking about, when you're in the act of creation, you have to get over yourself. And in the act of enjoying art, you gotta get over yourself. I also think of that line from C.S. Lewis about, the greatest fairy tales, they enchant you when you're 5 and when you're 50. A great comic, it's going to entertain you, well, depending on how many words are in the word bubbles. It's going to entertain you when you're young and when you're older. Like, quality holds up. That's just a fact. Embrace manga. This isn't a manga presentation, but I just can't get over this photo where these two friends, they just came down with stacks and stacks of this stuff. We have a pretty good checkout limit at Richland Library, like 60 items per person. And these two heard about that and they found our graphic novel section and they were just so proud of themselves. And they returned a stack of comics too. So it wasn't their first rodeo, but they were just so proud of themselves that they were going to check out all this stuff and read all of it. And you'll have parents come in and, somebody might have some graphic novels and the parents go, no, you have to read some real books with that. Okay, thank you. If you never want your child to enjoy reading again. I like the hybrid approach. Hey, you can check out some graphic novels. I'd also like you to read some regular novels to go with it. Sure, sounds wonderful. But you wouldn't, going back to the don't apologize for comics, like, you wouldn't tell somebody that their love of audiobooks wasn't experiencing the book, right? Why would you put someone down for their enjoying graphic novels, especially when so many people like to say they don't know how to read graphic novels? Well, if they're so easy, how come some people can't? Anyway. 4 was going to get into some of the nitty gritty shelving and displays. This goes back to my time at a branch library when I was starting as a librarian, and I sort of had like I had the YA shelves and the graphic novels all to myself for experimenting with. And so we had everything mixed together. And people tended to like our graphic novel collection. It was already established. But a lot of people would come in and say, well, can you point me out some of the manga? And so I thought, well, the manga, it's a uniform size usually. Our shelvers can tell pretty well what's manga, what's Western comics. So we're going to separate the manga out. And so that increased circulation a ton because people could find all kinds of stuff if they enjoy manga. And I would look at the collection some more and I was like, there's got to be some other way to filter, without doing it system wide. But is there something we can just do here just to see if it works? And I noticed that, DC and Marvel, they put that right on the spine that they're DC and Marvel comics. So I created a set of DC shelves, a set of Marvel shelves, the other graphic novels, and then a bunch of manga. And some people, they didn't they don't go in for every last publisher by name, but other people said, good, my 12-year-old likes superheroes, boom, here's all the superheroes. And it's separated by DC and Marvel, so we're not going to be like, oh, you like Iron Man? Oh, I accidentally grabbed a Superman comic. That's not going to happen. What we've done since as a library system in light of these experiments, I have some comics here to show you. So like we have a graphic novel here, Day Tripper. This is an all-in-one here. And we've got GN, Day Tripper, the title, and then Fabio Moon is one of the two authors on here. So that's good for your standalone. But we might also look at, we have a print edition of a webcomic here, unshelved. Some of you might recognize the library mascot Cage Match. But we have another category created that's GN Comics, and then just the title, unshelved. And that's also a good spot for finding your newspaper comics. So we have our, I don't know how well that'll show up, GN Comics Peanuts, and this edition is for the Peanuts from 1950 to 2000. But also, doesn't necessarily have to be a comic book. We also put a lot of our nonfiction books about comics, like 10 Cent Plague. We'll put it in the graphic novel area under comics. And because they're all together, it's pretty easy to put together. Okay, so they've got their graphic novels, they've got their manga, they have their collected editions of comics, and then they have their books all about comics, all together. Your mileage may vary. You may want to put directly on each one. You know, like I said about the labeling on spines, you know, we have Manifest Destiny here, GN Manifest Dinges from one of the authors, but the 7's already here on the spine. So this thing sorts itself out pretty well. But you might want to put V7 on the spine. That's up to you. And then meanwhile with manga, you know, we've got our GN Manga Barakamon. This one does say volume 7 for this series. Highly recommended if y'all don't have it yet. But we also have in our teen area, we do some cross promotion with, say, having the Jason Reynolds Miles Morales book in paperback, but also the Saladin Ahmed written Miles Morales series with Marvel for tie-in appeal. So when you make a display, it's not just, oh, do you love Spider-Man? Gotcha, it's a book. You can, it's a great book though, so it's not a gotcha. But you can also say, oh, you loved Into the Spider-Verse, you love this new Miles Morales game that came out on PlayStation. Well, guess what? You can read about them in all sorts of different ways, and all of them are great, and you came to the library, and we support your reading in whatever form it might take. Isn't that lovely? I'm gonna move on to the next point. Demystify the creative process. Whether that's breaking down all the steps it takes to make a comic, or whether it's a workshop where everyone makes their own zines, or talking about in a creative writing course, getting into the scripting, maybe pairing up an art program and a writing program, and maybe they make a comic together, would certainly be lovely. I'm gonna use my attached camera for a moment, because since we're in the makerspace, I thought I have to take advantage of this. We have this creative wall here where we show off different bits of artwork. You can see like we've got some painted pieces here. We have some different competitions, hoopla posters, different artwork from local artists, more artwork from teens who love to show off their stuff. But then we'll also just like have little guides here, like, you know, how do you do speech bubbles, and how do you make sure that there's room to breathe on each page and that everything follows in a natural sequence. We have a literary magazine through our library called Kids in Print, and there's some tips about writing and art, and you know, brevity is the soul of wit, and think about your composition and what are you drawing the eye toward. And then also stuff like, this one is just sort of a classic thing people sometimes refer to. It's Wally Wood's 22 panels that always work. And it's just intended for when someone's doing a comic where two people are talking the whole time, how do you do two talking heads, but still make it look interesting? But we'll also have, let me make sure I have this framed well. We have some Luciano Vecchio posters up here of like a lot of Black superheroes from Marvel and DC. We've got a signed piece from Sanford Green from his Luke Cage run. And this was signed, I think, as Luke Cage was running on Netflix. And we have some little bits here. That's just bragging at this point, but some Raina Telgemeier and Jean Lewin Yang postcards from seeing them at different ALA conferences, and more Luciano of LGBTQ superheroes. And you know what happens when people come in and they see these posters? They say, well, is this all one book? I say, no, it's a bunch of different superhero comics, but I'd be happy to show you where they are or place them on hold or find more information about them, because this stuff, it gets shown off and it gets in a way that makes people curious about it. They want to know more. Why did they put this up in the library? So here's an example of the creative process behind comics from alternativemedia.com. And it shows you how you go from the script to, like, you have to draw the thing. You have to draw the thing again. And then you have to really draw the thing again, like the perfect black and white rendition. And then you don't just color it in, you have to get your flats for what color spectrum you're going with, your palette, and then you do the detail work on top of that. So you have this 6-step process just to get like this page or two worth of material out. So being able to emphasize either the team effort or the intensely hard work that people do when they make their own comics. You have to plan the whole thing out, do a rough draft, do a middle draft, do a final draft, do all these finishing touches. There are people who are in love with learning process stuff like this. Next, promoting educational and developmental benefits to reading comics and graphic novels. They are a fantastic literacy and ESL tool. You have text that's accompanied by visual context clues. You have dialogue that is contained within speech bubbles and little caption boxes at the tops and bottoms of the panels. So context is much simpler to puzzle out compared to a dense text. You have the sequencing of the panels, you have onomatopoeia, punctuation, getting used to italicizing, bold-facing, underlining, but also different fonts. A lot of comics letterers will be creative with, maybe one person's inner monologue is done in cursive, and this person's is done in block text, and this character's angry, so it's giant red letters, for instance. And then you have regression, which comics helps a lot with, and this is important in your reading development. Regression, the ability to call back to something you saw a page ago, a chapter ago, a whole arc ago, if you're reading a series, and that builds a reading confidence that those readers will take to the next thing they read. And you can also build regression by reading a thing repeatedly. So I have to harp on that because I have to be so gentle with parents when I talk to them about it. So I just have to be insistent with y'all. If a kid's reading something 10 times in a row and they love it, that's them building a love of reading. They will grow up and challenge themselves. I promise you they will. 7, go personal. How did a certain panel or scene make you feel? An example I like to pull from is it's a short comic called Something Terrible by Dean Tripp. And it has to do with the cycle of abuse and a terrible thing that happens to him as a child. And he gets this idea from watching TV, even though he's a huge Batman fan, he gets this idea that like once someone has faced any sort of abuse, that's a thing that eventually they're going to fulfill that role and do it to someone else. And he's just filled with these self-destructive thoughts as a result of it. And then much later, as a young adult, he learns that no, that's just a myth, and that the things that he held on to, the different comics and pop culture and things that he would geek out over, that reinforced his joie de vivre, his lust for life, actually saved him from making an enormous grave error. And then you have Batman here, I think in a very poetic moment, he's enforcing his no guns rule. It's like, nope, can't do that. And he said about it, making my whole story into a comic has been just as freeing, it turns out, because now I feel like my life and what I learned while trapped by fear and shame can help others find their way out of that same darkness. And you came here for a comics presentation, but I'm also here to tell you that anything that ever happened to you when you were a child or to someone you love when they were children does not determine their future or their present. We get to determine that for ourselves. Let's have a drink to that. Moving on. Provide opportunities to geek out. So in addition to having all this cool stuff and starting these conversations, capitalize on it. Your community is full of talent and interest and things they want to show off. You can do trivia nights. Angie mentioned a trivia night just before we started. And getting their recommendations, whether even if it's just a dry erase sign and you just ask people, hey, what have you read lately? What's your favorite comic? Or what would you give to somebody who's never read a comic before? There were so many responses in the survey data from people. One of the questions was about what comic would you give your parents to that you think they would be into? And there would be this divide where some people would say, well, I'd give my mom, she enjoys fantasy. I'd give her this gentle fantasy comic. But dad, he's never been into comics. I don't know, I'd give him. Other people would say, well, I'd give dad this comic. He enjoys kung fu movies in one example. So I'd give him this one because it has great fight scenes. But mom, she's never really read. And so people would And I would share these responses with people, and they would see different things and say, wait, I think I'm going to try to introduce, they said their dad doesn't read it, so they should get this recommendation. And they would like compare notes and cross up their recommendations. So people read a million jillion comics, they want to share that love. So give them the opportunity to share it. Throw open the gates, comics are for everyone. This gets to the story of Harvey Pekar, amazing graphic novelist, among many things he's written. And after he passed, his wife, Joyce Br, she was looking at options for how do we commemorate what Harvey did in his life with all of his comics over the course of decades and media appearances. And, you know, he sort of became a bit of an icon in the comics world. And so they were like, do we make a giant billboard? Do we put a statue in a park? What do we do with him? And so they cast one of his pages in metal, and they have the quote here that means, what do you want from my life? Up in the Cleveland Heights Public Library Lee Road branch, where he did a lot of his own research. But this isn't a big statue. Guess how big it is? It's on a desk. And the key to this, as Joyce says so wonderfully here, it's about celebration and not celebrity. So inside this desk are a bunch of materials for making your own comics, as well as several of the books Harvey read that inspired him to make the comics that he did in his life. So the point isn't, here are great graphic novels, and this is the literary canon of graphic literature. And it's like, no, you can celebrate what came before, and it's like, but you also have the tools to make your own comics and make your own mark. And I think that's a beautiful thing. That's way better than a 100-foot statue that's like, Harvey Pekar did these comics and you'll never be able to touch that. It's like, no, he made his mark. You can make your mark. And then I'm going to put a very hypocritical 10th point on here to credit the team. That's a little hard when you're trying to fill up space, like, for example, this fresh pick teen copy of Jarrett Krasoska's Hey Kiddo. Well, he was the writer and artist, so it's easy in that case. But going back to Miles Morales, we just have Saladin Ahmed as the author of this, but I don't think Saladin Ahmed drew and inked and colored and edited and did every last thing that you find on the page. So when you can spare a few extra letters in your promos, just remember that it's the author and an artist and just a whole team of creative people that put these comics together. And I think that'll give people a realistic idea of what comics are and how they can express themselves. I have a picture here of Avery Harrison. He likes to use the idea of shapes for composition. So he shows how you can draw different pieces of anatomy, faces, and he moves on to settings and environments where he says you just need a circle, a square, and a triangle. As long as you've got those, you can draw anything, because you're just going to be putting together these shapes and polygons. I have a list of further resources here. American Library Association's Great Graphic Novel Roundtable has different resources and lists to help you build your collection. The Comic Book Legal Defense Fund has whole sections for librarians and different educational aspects to many different graphic novels, including what to do when people challenge graphic novels in your library because they don't like, oh, somebody got shot in this graphic novel. Somebody took their shirt off. Think, you know what? I think I'm going to take my shirt off for this thing too. Image Comics did not compensate me to wear their shirt on camera, I promise. School Library Journal, especially their Good Comics for Kids blog, is full of great recommendations. No Flying, No Tights is an entire database of reviews by librarians for librarians, and you can sort it by a bajillion different criteria for all different kinds of representation and age groups and, lower, middle, and high school. Diamond Bookshelf. Diamond is the comics retailer that sells to lots of different bookstores and comic book shops. And they've gotten on the wagon with promoting to libraries, promoting to educators, and they have some great columnists there. The Eisner and Harvey Awards, you can almost think of as like the Oscars and the, People's Choice Award, or the Oscars and the Emmys of the comics world. If you go down those lists and you look at acquiring everything you find on those lists, your readers will not be disappointed. A lot of that stuff shows up in the mega list I'm going to share. The Native Writers List from Debbie Reese. I have a few graphic novels with native representation in them in my list. I haven't read everything out there. Debbie Reese, however, makes a definite point of reading as much of what's out there from native writers and artists as she possibly can. And she has a wonderful list full of comics that she endorses. So I'm going to endorse the endorser here. Yalsa's great graphic novels for teens. Those of you who saw the manga presentation, I separated out all the manga from that. There's still just great graphic novels to have in general. And there's a whole bunch I didn't say about zines yet, where that's very much like the DIY, making like little comics, like you just fold it together and staple it, and use a Xerox machine. And you just make like 50 copies of your own little thing and pass it out to people or sell it for $1. And I think there's one, I think I may have added too many links. There's going to be one more tiny URL that's going to send you to a super list that I should be able to get back to share screen if I stop share and then reshare. Again, there's a million graphic novels in the world. This is just like a starter pack of sorts. I'm missing all kinds of classics. There's a lot of European comics that I'm missing just because they're all beautiful and I wouldn't even know where to start with giving you a starting point with that. I've got middle grade and early YA graphic novels, so standalone stuff, and then middle grade and early YA series. My definition of early YA here is this isn't this, an 18-year-old might enjoy it, but there's nothing in here that would make me say, oh yeah, that's good for teens if they were 18. Graphic novelizations, adaptations, and spin-offs. If your library does not have a graphic novel collection, sometimes this is a good way to get your foot in the door and say, well, we still want teens to read the classics, or we want them to see a different version, a transmedia, right, approach to certain books. Having adaptations can be a good way to start your graphic novel collection, because having them over in the 741.5s, do I have that right? If they're lucky and they know the Dewey Decimal System when they're 10, okay, they'll notice that all the comics are always in the same place. They'll notice it much more easily if all your comics are actually sitting out saying, hello, we are the comics section. Look at this cool picture we have on the end of our stacks. That might actually draw some readers over to enjoy them. And then just great graphic novels for a general collection that would include adults. You see a whole bunch there. I've got over 300 titles on this list. And then great series. And the reason in the manga list, I was able to say, this series is, 80 volumes, this series is 12 volumes and ongoing. It's a little trickier here, if only because a lot of publishers, they'll say like, okay, we'll take 6 issues and we'll put it together in a trade. But then they'll take 2 trades and make a hardback out of that. And then they might take 2 hardbacks and make some really fat brick of an omnibus out of that. So I would advise you in your metadata and where people can see the descriptions in your catalog, please make sure it includes collects issues number 1 through whatever, or this one collects 8 through 15, this one 16 to 21, just so that it makes it easier for people who are navigating your skinny trades and your bigger books and then your omnibuy, because that'll definitely happen with stuff like The Walking Dead and Saga, a lot of different Marvel DC series where it's just these enormous books all over the place. And I included some newspaper stuff. I think this would be a good representation of things people consider classics from a variety of decades. I got Nancy listed twice because guess what? What's old is new, but what was old was pretty good. So it works out. And other superhero titles and series and just other superhero universes, before you go down the DC Marvel rabbit hole, maybe consider some of these. They're not bad. I'm happy to read all of them. Okay, I think that gets me to where I wanted time-wise, and we can get to some Q&A.
So first of all, hi Tom, it's me, I'm back. First of all, I want to reassure everybody. So Thomas made that list. It's 11 pages of recommended titles. He said there's like 300 recommended titles on there. That's going to be included
Yes.
in the resources. So everybody will have access to that. And also this slide that has all these links that he talked about, we'll also share that too. So you'll be able to click on all those links and explore all of those links. So Thomas, thank you so much for that. That's a huge part of it. If you want to look in the chat, I say, how do you address it when parents are they want their kids to read real books. But
I
you don't
mean,
want to come off as judgmental or preachy.
Right. Well, I think the hybrid approach is good, where you say, let them have their comics, enjoy their comics, but then say, okay, for maybe every 2 graphic novels you check out one, and make sure to call it like a novel or a prose book, or as long as they're not putting down the other thing they're reading, because then that creates that that binary in their head of things I enjoy bad, things that they're making me read good. It's like it's more just about finding what you love.
Mm-hmm. And for me too, I think I always went with the compromise route, and I too was really scrupulous in my description to never use real, to be really mindful of the language I was. So I never said real books, and to just be really clear in the language I was using so they could model that.
And you can use the parents' language to advocate for comics, because I often hear, well, they're not really reading the comic, they're just flipping through and looking at the pictures. Well, have you ever been bored by a novel and you just skipped a chapter, or you said, you know what, this is a point of view book and I don't like this character here, I'm just going to go to the character I like in the book? I know none of us are supposed to admit that. We're all librarians, we read every last word, but some people do that.
Thomas, thank you. Do you want to put your contact slide on? Because the other thing I want to follow up with is, if you have questions you want to follow up with Thomas about, if you want to talk to him about a specific title or cataloging, I know a bunch of you reached out to him after the manga webinar, and he would welcome hearing from you to talk with you about, what do you think about this series or shelving, or he would be happy to hear from you. You can contact him directly. Yes, Thomas, I'm not just volunteering you to things.
Well, and I can help connect you to all different, there's several different publishers that are actively reaching out to libraries. Image is giving out t-shirts to librarians with the little image eye in it and whatnot. I know Valiant and Humanoids and DC, they all have catalogs where they say, if you want to buy our books, here's an excellent place to start. We'll make sure they stay in print. Or here's something that was a classic that people always ask about. Here's our new edition of it. And there's always new imprints starting up left, right, and center. Like Random House Graphic
Harper
shows
Alley.
up, and it's who else?
Harper Alley.
Harper Alley. Yep.
Yeah, and God, there's so many. There's so many.
And Scholastic didn't slow down. They
Oh,
know
yeah.
what side their bread's buttered on.
Scholastic sent me this Cat Kid Comic Club
Hey.
promo, and then inside is a finished copy of Cat Kid. And there's this whole thing that's here's what Cat Kid wants you to know. So they sent that to us, and it stands up, so you can make it a stand up, you can make it a stand. So they know what makes them money. So everybody, this is 2:00. First of all, Thomas, yay, thank you. Everybody, this is the last time in here if you have questions. Although again, what we just said, if you want to contact Thomas off list, if you want to say to him, hey, I have this question, that also I want to point out too, to the document, I just scanned through it, that they're not just teen titles. Also, there are some titles on there that have adult appeal. So if you're looking to build your adult collection, this isn't just for kids and teens. I think that's another thing. I know that's what this session was for, but there's a lot of adult readers who want these books as well.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the comics on there that Thomas listed, if you've been hesitant about starting an adult collection and you're well, we really only have the Dogman comics because adults don't want to read this, you can get a whole new demographic of people into the library. If you have all of the Walking Dead comics, you're going to get 20 to 30-year-olds coming into the library. They want to read them. So I think that as a reminder.
And they'll let you know when there's a hole in the collection. Hey,
yes.
Volume 18's missing. Thank you for that.
Yes. So don't just think about it. A lot of this was obviously geared toward kids and teens, but don't just think about it like that. There's a whole young adult cohort, 20 to 30, who have grown up reading this and they want to keep reading it at the library. So
stuff like Ali Brosh's Hyperbole and a Half,
absolutely,
where a lot of people maybe don't read a ton of graphic novels, but they say, but that one, it got me right in the heart, talking about her anxiety and depression and her existential crisis, and it just happened to be a graphic novel and happened to communicate its message beautifully to people.
And then the ways that you can be and if you liked this, here's some other first person point of view comics, or yes, we carry those. So a lot of times adults are kids now are, yeah, of course the library is going to have comics. Adults are the ones who are I can't believe how many comics you have. So don't forget them too in that conversation about it's not just the 0 to 18 cohort that we're talking about
It
here.
can be all things to all people. In the golden age of comics, there were as many girls reading comics as boys. It's not a gender divide. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby would joke that it was romance comics that bought them a house instead of the superhero stuff. All genres, all people, as much representation as you can fit is what I would say. Go for it.